Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Last Edit Podcast, a weekly podcast on film starring yours truly, Silver Hawkins, and the amazing.
Citizen Slave, hello there.
As you know, the Last Edit is a weekly podcast on film in which Sleeve and I alternate between picking various films that, unfortunately, we feel don't really get the attention they deserve. For one reason or another. They tend to be a little obscure. People don't really know about them all that well. And this week I chose a film that neither of us had actually seen before, that I was a little more familiar with because I'd read about it, I'd read reviews, I'd seen trailers and clips here and there about it, and I was really interested in it. But it is Ari Folman's The Congress, and if Ari Folman sounds familiar, it's because he was also the director of another film we talked about earlier, which was Waltz with Bashir, a film that Sleeve and I both were very fond of and highly recommend that you watch. So yeah, we watched The Congress together, and I think it's safe to say that we both came away pretty impressed. It pretty much left us stunned throughout the end credits, like just trying to digest the film afterwards. Really interesting experience. Highly recommend this film to anyone who hasn't seen it. Go look it up if you don't know about it, and hopefully we will try to cover it as best as we are able to. So, I mean, like I said, you hadn't seen it before, and my impression was that you didn't know all that much about it going into it.
No, not at all. So I was aware of Walter Bashir before we saw it because it was one of those films that had come across my path but I'd never watched. This film I literally never heard of. Not the premise, not even the fact it had been made, not the fact Robin Wright was a version of her exists within the film as the primary protagonist. None of those things. So for me, it was a complete blind viewing.
Yeah, we should say like the main synopsis of the film is basically it takes place in an alternate universe in which Robin Wright basically plays another version of herself, in which she starred in The Princess Bride, was Jenny in Forrest Gump, also starred in State of Grace. But she didn't really make anything of her career. She preferred to stay at home and take care of her kids, who are also fictional in this case. And one of them, Aaron, has a serious medical problem that is deteriorating, and will leave him blind and deaf as he reaches adulthood. And Robin Wright is then offered sort of given a final offer from her movie studio Miramax, which is sort of an amalgam of Miramax and Paramount, and it's also, I think, just a commentary on like mergers, like a lot of these mergers we've seen between these major studios. And she's given a contract, or the offer of a contract, her final one, in which they'll scan her likeness, and then they'll just use her likeness in whatever scenarios and movies they want, and she'll never act again. So she gets a one-time fee to cover her for like the rest of her life. And yeah, she basically gets a deal with the devil to sort of sell her identity, and that is like the fundamental sort of starting off point of the film, but it then goes from there and becomes something entirely different that I think going too deeply into at this point would be spoiling too much. It really sort of has to be experienced. But that is like the fundamentally starts off as like a really searing indictment of Hollywood.
Yeah, it's essentially a sci-fi thriller to begin with.
Yeah.
A comment on what's happening now with. It began long ago with people like Steve McQueen being digitized into adverts, and now obviously we're seeing people like Carrie Fisher posthumously being
Laurence
added as
Olivier.
young Laurence Olivier, a lot of famous actors, and in essence, it's a commentary upon that. But the film has very distinct halves. The first 40 minutes is live action, and it's really engaging. It's really interesting. It's interesting because of its motifs and its cinematography. I mean, Robin Wright playing this version of herself is such a being John Malkovich thing. You know,
Yes.
it's a really unusual thing for an actor to or an actress to portray themselves, but this odd other version, this alternate version. And in this, it's basically as if House of Cards and some of her other work don't exist. And as you said,
Well, it
State of
was
Grace.
before. like somewhat before they started production before she.
Oh, really? Was it? So it kind of overlapped. That's interesting as well, actually. So she's this actress who's made bad choices and not been able to star in some of the most prominent films of her time, and she is essentially guided by Harvey Keitel, who's her agent throughout the years, and he basically comes to the conclusion after seeing what's being offered by Danny Huston, this unscrupulous, quite nasty chief exec of the studio.
He could basically be Harvey Weinstein.
Oh, very much so. He's very slimy and salacious as an individual, and he's portrayed really well by Danny Huston. Yeah. Especially in both parts of the film. We won't even talk about the second part until we cover the first, I think, because they're so distinct.
No, absolutely.
It's got such a Full Metal Jacket vibe about it in terms of those two halves. But so her son's really ill and is deteriorating, as you said. He's losing his sight, he's losing his hearing, and it's going to speed up. And we see Paul Giamatti, who's the family doctor, who's been trying to help Aaron to judge his condition and how quickly he will degrade, as it were. Now, she just wants to spend time with the kids at home, and she wants to look after her family. And in essence, a contract is given to her for her entire likeness, as Danny Huston's character says. Her face, her emotions, her body, her happiness, her depression, everything you can imagine. And then from that moment forth, she is not allowed to star or appear in anything to do with movies or theaters or visual or audio production, anything at all. Everything then is
not
even
like
studio.
Amateur plays or
yeah, exactly. Yeah, they even
like
say that,
plays.
not even amateur plays. And the whole premise is that from that moment forth, the studio controls that image, controls Robin Wright, and can put her in anything they deem fit.
Yeah.
So, I should say as well, all the performances in this film are pretty outstanding.
Yeah.
Robin Wright is just amazing at playing this skewed version of herself. And then you have Danny Huston as the chief exec of the studio, who, as we said, is really slimy, the sleazeball character.
And Harvey Keitel as her agent.
Who has a wonderful scene, which we'll get to a little bit later on.
I mean, there are a couple of really effective scenes early on. Like, a couple of them are with her son, and one is the one with her agent. Like, the ones with her son, there's one where he's flying his kite, and because he has hearing difficulty, you basically get his experience of, like, this. You hear this sound becomes really distant.
Like you're underwater almost.
Yeah, precisely, like you're underwater. And he's flying his kite near the airport, and the kite is going in over the fence, and so the airport security guards come with barking German shepherds and stuff, and he can barely notice it. And the other is when Robin Wright and the doctor, played by Paul Giamatti, as you mentioned, basically discuss Aaron's diagnosis, and Aaron is there and he's watching them behind glass, so he can't hear them, but he's reading their lips as they are discussing his future and his coming inevitable diagnosis and inevitable decay. And that scene too is also really, really effective.
Even when they've been to the studio, they've seen the deal, she doesn't want to do it initially, and Harvey Keitel's trying to convince her. There's that brilliant moment when he rocks up at the house with one of the studio execs who designs these contracts, and they come in, and he walks round and he taps Aaron on the shoulder and he looks at him, make sure he's all right, because they're family. Yeah. And then he proceeds to just unload on her. You have made the worst decisions you could possibly make in your career. You were in Princess Bride. You were in Forrest Gump. You were in State of Grace, these amazing films, and you had all these opportunities to be in these other... we don't know what they could have been, in this fictional, realized version of her life. I'd imagine they would be Meryl Streep roles or Oscar-winning roles, amazing, wonderful films that she's apparently declined. And eventually, slowly but surely, she comes around to this idea of being able to just spend the rest of her time with her family and have and earn a living from her image being used by the studio in whatever they want, in essence, to be used for. There are clauses in the contract. She doesn't want to do sci-fi.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's what the studio executive brings, is he basically tells her that you need to sort of lawyer up and get these options in while you can. So that, for instance, you put in an option. You put an option in or a clause in the contract that says you cannot use my likeness for pornography or the like.
And the actual contract itself is 20 years, which is important as we move towards the end of the live action sequence of the film. Now, it all comes to a head, and she signs the contract, and she ends up going to this facility. And there's a really touching moment prior, or we discussed it when we were watching it together, when she recognizes a former cinematographer that she'd worked with. This guy who paints the cinematic picture for a director, and he's now scanning people. And that kind of, I said to you at the time, it made my heart sink a little bit, because it's taking someone's true artistry away from them to some extent. But she goes along with Harvey Keitel's agent.
It's funny. Just sorry to interrupt, but with that studio that she's going to, like the motion capture studio, Ari Folman had sort of been location scouting, and then they found, because he didn't realize that a studio like that actually existed. So that's actually like a full real motion capture studio that they use, like the giant half globe thing, and that's real. Like that's used for, like, I think it was used for some Zemeckis productions,
Polar Express and stuff. Perhaps,
like Beowulf and stuff. And like it looks like this science fiction thing, and it is actually real, which was a bit of a funny story, I thought, from the production of the film.
It's amazing how much future tech is actually just now tech. Quite frankly, it's a whole other discussion, but it's very interesting. So she's taken down to the machine, which is this giant sphere. In the UK, have you ever seen the Crystal Maze? It's basically the end of the Crystal Maze, but with better tech, and not gold things flying around you have to catch. And so she goes in there, and they're trying to elicit emotion from her, trying to make her happy initially. And the scans begin. And as she's trying to emote, she just loses it. Not in a dramatically emotional way, but she just loses the ability to perform. He tries to make her,
like, he tells her, like, now is the time to be scared. So when as she delves into the more sort of uncomfortable aspects, that's when she starts to lose it. No doubt also in part because, like, as the motion scanners capture her, like, there are flash photography, like, everywhere.
Yeah. If you have epilepsy, don't get scanned. I mean, absolutely not. So she kind of breaks down a little bit, and the Harvey Keitel's agent turns to the cinematographer and says, "I've got this. I know what to do." And I think this is just a wonderful moment and performance from him. It's just an amazing scene. He tells this story about how he initially became a talent agent at school. Yeah. By basically, there was this kid who had a tail, and this little tail, this abnormality, he basically wanted to sell and make money from and use. And he started doing this in school more and more, and he ended up with a group of people who might be called, the maligned or whatever within that environment, and basically uses them for his own gain, and starts talking about this incredibly odd way into the position he became, and then starts relating that to Robin Wright and how he found this chink, this fear in her that he could use and play upon, and that initiates all this emotion. The sadness and tears and elements of anger, but she's really just incredibly upset about the situation and the story that she's being told, and that's when the cinematographer kicks in and starts scanning all these emotions.
Yeah,
and then we kind of end the final, the live action bit. Well, not quite, but that sequence.
Yeah, and then we jump forward 20 years.
We jump forward 20 years to the end of the contract, and it's really interesting how it begins. So that's the live action portion of the film, and it's very easy to follow. It's not overly complex. We've discussed many of these things in technology terms before. The idea of fakes and stuff like that.
But the way it's sort of handled in this film is really interesting, and sort of the themes that it brings up in terms of, like, Hollywood and indicting, like, the basically what amounts to sort of a slave trade where entertainers become commodities. Like like the rage that the studio executive has towards Robin for the choices that she's made is palpable. Like, you've cost us
Oh,
money.
absolutely, yes.
Um, so yeah, that's really engaging and really interesting, and it seems like the movie is sort of going to go more in that direction and be like the subversive, heavy critique of Hollywood, and it is to an extent, but it also becomes so much more than that in what is to follow.
It really, really does. And this is where I think the film becomes remarkable. Now, before we just get to that, prior to the podcast, I read a bunch of articles that you sent me, and also read a bunch of reviews, watched a bunch of reviews, just to see the kind of general feeling. I always find it interesting when I watched a film to then go and look at other people's ideas and concepts. And the first thing is the transition to this cartoon world, which we'll explain in a minute. So 20 years later, Robin Wright is driving down this very long road, comes to like an almost toll booth with like a security guard, and is given a vial to take. She's on her way to what's called the Congress. And once she takes this vial, the security guard says, "You won't know you're back in the real world until you see me again." So just a nod to causality that we'll mention later on. She takes the vial, and as she's driving towards the Congress, this massive building, everything becomes more cartoon-like. And
Yeah, it starts with seeing her own self in the rearview mirror.
her own self, and the car changes into a boat, and she very elaborately gets there on waves, and it's in a very dramatic and very cool
and
way.
basically at that early stage, it basically evokes Yellow Submarine by the Beatles to a large extent, like the trippy colors and stuff. I guess very reminiscent of the Yellow Submarine animation.
Yeah, definitely very very poppy and very bold.
Yeah.
And then we get into the Congress, this building, and it's just a menagerie of some of the most wonderful 40s, 50s, and 60s animation styles, with some of the most iconic characters of pop culture surrounding her, and it's chaotic, it's quite sublime visually, and audibly for that matter, and it's interesting because as she arrives and she walks through the foyer and into the actual the hotel, she's on a son to her phone, Aaron, trying to describe this experience, how trippy it is. Yeah. And at the time, I said to you, it's a bit like Fear and Loathing. It's like a Hunter S. Thompson moment, taking too much LSD, and everything around her has become this entire alternate dimension almost compared to the reality she was in. And both of us were absolutely dazzled by the animation, the art, it's so visually stunning. It envelops you.
Like you say, there are a lot of like animation references there. Like a lot of them are back to like Max Fleischer, 1930s, Felix the Cat, Betty Boop and stuff. The style with the like the flailing boneless arms. Like
the big wavy.
Yeah, that don't have any solid matter in them. And also like Ralph Bakshi and especially like the animation style he uses in Cool World, which is also sort of reminiscent of Max Fleischer as well, and yeah, there are other moments in the animation that evokes like Hayao Miyazaki and Japanese anime, and it's just this tremendous like cornucopia basically of animation references from all these different styles and stuff that just sort of meet and mingle together.
And then the narrative starts becoming more complex. And this is one of the things I found with a lot of the reviews that I watched. Not only the jarring kind of almost hard cut into the animation, there's no transition, there's no, flashy changeover, as it were. It just kind of becomes animation. And I think a lot of people felt that was a huge jolt.
Yeah.
And too distinct. Where there wasn't a kind of feed-in moment that you have in, say, Cool World or Roger Rabbit or films that have live action and animation components. It's a bit more like A Life Less Ordinary, actually. At the end, they ran out of money and they shot this kind of stop motion end. And it just becomes that thing.
Yeah.
But I was dazzled by it.
I mean, one thing I really appreciated was that even as fantastical as it is, it maintains a sense of grittiness, I guess. I mean, especially in... So she enters the hotel lobby, and then she goes up to her own hotel room. And that scene I really liked, because that scene is like incredibly intimate and lonely, where she's up by herself up there, and even has some like nudity, like animated nudity, where Robin Wright is just tremendously vulnerable, looking at herself in the mirror, seeing herself at first as like the young Robin Wright, Princess Buttercup, and then she becomes an older woman in the mirror, and like with the wrinkles and the hanging breasts and so forth that come with age, and the vulnerability there is just really, really palpable. And the way that's portrayed, I found absolutely enchanting.
Oh, very much. I mean, as I said at the time, it oddly reminded, well, not oddly, it's quite similar, but it reminded me of the Melisandre moment in the first episode of the final season of Game of Thrones at the end, where she takes the amulet off and becomes her true self, this very old woman. We should say as well, on the way to the hotel room, where she has this almost mini mental breakdown and reality becomes distorted. But prior to that, she's walking past and she's seeing Michael Jackson, and she's seeing these iconic, not just animated, but these pop culture figures that are
like Marilyn
just
Monroe
everywhere.
suddenly
Marilyn
becomes
Monroe's...
John Wayne, becomes Conan O'Brien,
and she doesn't quite understand why yet. But it's the drug that she's taken, and this idea that you can now take a drug that can change your facade.
You can become anyone and become anything.
Anyone you want to, exactly. But the hotel room is, as you said, it's a really touching moment. It's really emotional, because you basically see her break down. You see her life almost flash before her eyes, from the Princess Bride all the way through to this old woman now who hasn't acted for 20 years. And there's that moment as well when all the lights go off, and she calls somebody on the phone in the hotel to ask about it. And they basically say, well, did you decide in your world that the lights were going to be off? You control this. This is your reality. This is not, you're not in somebody else's world, as it were. You have created this world, and you're living within it. Which is, again, another important point we'll come back to later on. The animation style in that scene is so much more stark than the chaotic nature of what we've seen before. And that's what makes it so distinct against those opening elements of the animation, against the really downbeat and quite somber and almost melancholic section of that little hotel room bit. So basically, she's supposed to go to this big meeting with all these other people, who a lot of them, or most of them, who have opted in to the Congress and have taken this drug to live out their lives.
I mean, first she's supposed to meet with like the studio head again, and extend her contract for the next 20 years.
And that's really interesting, isn't it? Because he's now in this tiny little cupboard office. Animated, Danny Huston is obviously now. And they're going through the contract, and before they go in the room,
in the waiting room,
go on.
Like Tom Cruise is there, like the animated version of Tom Cruise, as the only other sort of Hollywood actor who made it to this point, because everyone else has died off. And
it's a really cool caricature. It really is.
In a flight suit.
In the flight suit with the Top Gun glasses on,
and the
it's quite interesting.
White teeth.
I'm surprised they haven't been sued, because you know what Tom Cruise is like with his image. And it even says Tom Cruise in the credits when we watch it afterwards. It's like, that's really funny. So she goes in to see the studio head, and at this point he's like, look, you might as well just do porn now and do this now and do that now, because no one cares anymore. You're ours. That's what you are.
And he also has this, I mean, one of, I think, key sort of tenet lines to one of the commentaries in the film, which is, when you fantasize in the evening or at night in bed, do you pay royalties to the person that you're basically bringing into your thoughts and fantasizing about? That's what we want to do.
So strange, but so intelligently complex.
Yeah.
And the themes that we'll discuss in a bit as well, on top of the existing themes. I mean, it's such a layered movie. It's quite remarkable, the amount of different themes it attempts to
and I think that's one of the reasons why some people become alienated by it, is just because of that sensory overload, like in terms of both information and sensory input.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I said last night, a couple of nights ago when we were watching it, that part of the issue, I think, for a lot of people with this film is it's such a long period of sensory overload that cognition is going to be difficult. If you're not used to something so complex, with so many ideas floating around, and this convolution of ideas, then you're going to struggle to cognate what you're seeing. So it's one of those films that, I mean, we've only seen it once, and I'll be going back and watching it multiple times because I have missed so much. We both have.
Yeah.
There's so many things within this film that are hidden and subtextual.
Like going on in the background, little references and stuff, yeah.
Exactly. There's plenty we'll have missed that we'll need to pick up on again. So she's had the meeting with Danny. She's agreed this extension to the contract. And now she enters this big, massive room with everybody facing a stage. And like the CEO of this company comes out and starts talking about this new drug this new thing they've developed.
Yeah, because they basically like the movie studio has merged with a pharmaceutical company.
Yeah, and taken it's such an interesting idea. Has taken the essence of individuals from their DNA and turned it into a drug that people can use to essentially drink Robin Wright and kind of become her and exist within this world. So it's not just anymore about what we're experiencing in modern culture.
They've cracked the the chemical code of free will, is what they say.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so much fun. I mean, the groundwork is laid out with what we've experienced already, with the idea of the digital creation of a human being as a celebrity or an actor or whatever, and then being used. This is a whole nother level. And it goes beyond postmodernism.
Yeah.
Which is so interesting. I mean, postmodernism, the idea of high and low art and low culture, and the idea of that just not existing, but then also the reuse and reworking of styles.
And the questioning of reality.
And what is reality? The notion of hyper-reality.
Yeah.
All these things are prevalent, but the film moves past that. And that is what's so astonishing to me. So few films can manage to do something as effectively as this.
Yeah.
So few. And this one, in my opinion, nails it. Absolutely nails it. So the CEO is on stage. He's announcing this new thing. And there's two guys either side him in blue and red pants banging drums, which is really odd.
Like blue and red tighty whities, basically.
Tighty whities, yeah. And naked everywhere else, with giant beards and long hair. Yeah. Oh, man, some of the characters are so distinct. Even if they're tiny bit parts, they really are. Ari Folman's ability to create an animated world is absolutely fantastical.
Yeah.
Just staggeringly beautiful. So Robin Wright's called up on stage as the guest of honor or whatever it is, because she's one of the most successful people they've had, and her essence is one of the first off the production line. And we've already seen the kind of films the studio has made with her, which is the sci-fi action films that she never wanted to be made, the really shallow, generic crap that she wanted to never end up doing. And they're the things the studio decided will sell. And she gets up on stage and essentially says, this is all wrong. This is all wrong. What you're doing is wrong. The idea of taking someone's literal essence and being able to drink it to become them and fulfill that dream in this fantasy world, when the actual reality they live in, as we find out later, is almost post-apocalyptic now, with people in poverty and hunger and all these different things. And yeah, she makes her case, makes this statement, and everything goes nuts. There's basically a group outside, a rebellion. And as she finishes her speech, and the CEO looks at her in disdain, this rebellion happens. And animated characters start clashing and running everywhere, and the Fleischer wavy arms are going crazy in the crowd. It's so chaotic and immensely cool to look at. The ropes coming down with people flying from the ceiling and people shooting guns, and and these slight different animation styles amalgamated and fit together. This wonderful visual jigsaw. It's such a wonderfully put together sequence. And so from that, she basically is trying to escape now. She wants to get out of this place. She wants to find her son Aaron. She wants to make sure he's okay in the real world. But the problem is that time is moving quickly in this world compared to the real world. So time is really against her, and she has to find a way out. But every time she thinks she might get to a point where she's finding a way out, Danny Huston appears as kind of like this chief executive security officer with a gang of thugs.
Yeah,
like, you're now under arrest.
With like in one instance, very heavy like SS imagery, like the black uniforms, and stuff.
Oh yeah. There's definitely a touch of almost SS there,
like fascist.
You know. Yeah, dictatorish. Yeah, absolutely. Man, one of the really amazing moments for this is so there is gas that comes into the room, and she ends up meeting this guy played by John Hamm, who has been digitally recreating her and using her image in film since the very beginning.
Yeah, he's been her animator, so he's basically been the person who's acted for her for the last 20 years.
Yeah, for the duration of that entire contract. And he loves her. He has this love for her. And he's always wanted to meet the real her and not just be behind this performance.
This love that sort of borders, because he's had to study her so intensely, he's basically become obsessed by her, which has sort of become this kind of love, but not. It's weird because it's not really. It initially comes off as kind of creepy, but it grows into something much more, and much deeper.
This is obsessive infatuation.
Yeah,
is the surface level, but as they get to know each other, I should say, and he helps her and tries to get her out of this situation, of this place, of the Congress. She slowly but surely starts falling in love with him as well. So they kind of escape. He puts like breathing bubbles on their head. They end up in this weird, I think it's like a purple pool, where lots of people are trying to stay away from
yellow,
everything
I think it's
and recover. Yellow pool.
Yeah.
And they're trying to recover.
And people are riding cockroaches and stuff.
Cockroaches, which is crazy again. But very, very 40s animation, 30s animation. You used to see that, dancing cockroaches and things. You don't see that anymore. And eventually she comes out of this poisoning almost she's had.
Well, it should be said, like she imagines herself, or you see her basically getting caught by the Hollywood executive, and she gets flown out on a helicopter in a scene that's basically out of a Vietnam movie, basically out of We Were Soldiers or stuff, where she's on a gurney,
like Apocalypse
with her head, like on the gurney, as the helicopter flies, and you see the ground move by below them, and then of course her son is flying his kite, and the kite goes into the rotor engine, and the helicopter crashes, and then she sees herself being executed by the studio executive, and she begs him to execute her rather. And then we of course learn that that's just her hallucinating, that she's basically delved so deeply into the drug that she's taken that she cannot get out of these hallucinations. She's trapped in them, and that they basically have to freeze her with cryo technology for 20 years until they're able to treat her successfully.
And isn't that the point at which we get another dreamlike kind of delusion that she has, where it's Dr. Strangelove and she's riding the bomb? That's just fantastic as well.
I don't remember when that was specifically, but it is the point where she basically, because she gets cryogenically frozen, so she's walking this Arctic landscape, and again she meets her son, and she basically starts like he's flying his kite, and he then sort of skis over the ice, and she grabs onto him, and they skate along the ice. But of course, she has bare feet, and so the ice also cuts into her feet. And as they're going through the ice, she leaves a blood trail behind, which is also sort of really evocative. And you wouldn't see that in most animation. Like, I really appreciated that as well.
The starkness of the blood on the ice, on the snow. Yeah. And the red kite, and the fact that he's now in his late 20s or early 30s.
Yeah.
It's again one of those really beautiful sequences, and visually.
We should say, like, the relationship between Robin and her son is basically the emotional core of the movie. The anchor. It's Robin's anchor, and it's really also ours.
All she wants to do is protect him.
Yeah.
Now, that's all she wants to do, and and she'll fight for it. And that's what the latter part of the film is. It's trying to fight her way out of this
and get back to him.
And get back to him from
because
this
I mean
reality.
before she left for the Futurological for the Congress, she hadn't left him he had never been alone in those 20 years. Like, she'd always been by his side, but she'd had to leave him there.
Yeah,
and that's why she's so desperate to get back to him.
Yeah, and she's basically then woken up, still in the animated world in the embassy, by John Hamm's character, who's waited for her all this time. All this time.
Yeah, for the 20 years.
And in reality, he's probably a 75-year-old man. But he's in his animated guise still within this world. And over this time, he's managed to get, for all the work he's done prior in the studio and everything, he manages to get this pill. And this pill...
Yeah, I mean, we should say before that, I mean, he takes her around to show her the new world that she's woken up to. Like,
oh, yeah, because he wants her to stay.
Yeah, like 20 years, and so he takes her around, and they go to visit her other child, which is her daughter, who basically lives in this hippie nudist compound now, or community. But they can't go and see her because they don't know. I mean, everyone who has taken a pill, you can't find them because they could be anyone. They could be anything. So they only know, like, she lives in this community and she's happy here. That's all we know. That's gonna have to be enough. You can't go and meet her. You can't go and talk to her because we don't know where she is, and she's not going to be able to recognize you.
Which is very, very important at the end of the film.
Yeah.
Really important. And again, I'll just repeat it. This is her own creation, this world. And everyone who enters this animated world creates their own facade, their own environments, their own dreamlike states that is distinct to them.
Yeah.
So
he takes her around to sort of talk about the new reality, what the world is like now, and goes to show her daughter, and then they try and find her son, but he cannot find Aaron. And so, as you said, they eventually arrive at the point where they're sitting down, they're having dinner, and she's asking him, well, maybe he isn't in this world, maybe he's out there, maybe he's one of the people who refuse to take the pill and live in this sort of fantastical reality or hallucinatory reality. So maybe he's on the other side. So how do I get to the other side? I want to get there so I can find Aaron. And that's when he says that he basically got, as compensation from the company, he got a pill that basically, if you take it, you wake up back in actual reality. And
that's a really touching scene as well. I mean, she now knows how much he loves her. To wait for 20 years, after working, as her animator for 20 years, this dedication has become a lot more than that for her now. And he basically gives her an option. It's
a way out.
A way out. It's the red pill, blue pill, but in a different guise and done very beautifully. He knows that if she takes this pill, she'll never see him again.
Yeah, and he'll never see her.
He'll never be able to find her. Even if he removes himself from reality, he's just going to be this old guy. And he knows that she's probably going to have to do it to find her son. But even though it's going to break his heart, he still gives her the pill. And there's not any sense of jealousy. There's not any sense of it's just a sense of heartache.
I mean, he does plead with her to stay with him, but the moment
there's no guilt tripping or anything.
And the moment she makes her decision that this is what I want, he goes okay.
Yeah.
And sort of the acceptance of her wanting to go and letting her go is incredibly beautiful and a real marker of actual love, like selfless love.
Yeah. And so she takes the pill and then she starts walking through people, and we get this hard.
Of course, before she leaves him, he does get her to promise him that she will not look at him in his
in reality,
real physical form. That she will remember him in the animated form that she had perceived him to be.
Yeah, as this almost handsome, swashbuckling...
Yeah, sort of Clark Gable type.
Yeah, classic Spencer Tracy kind of vibes going on with that particular character design. So she takes the pill, she exits the animated world, and she enters very brown, very grey, very dystopian.
Looks very Children of Men.
It does, yeah, it does, and realizes what's happened over the last 20 years. The world has fallen into post-apocalypse almost. It's a horrible place to be.
And you have all these people around her that are just staring blankly into space because they are tripped out on the drug, hallucinating, like in their own reality.
Yeah, and a bit like Terry Gilliam's Brazil almost. We have this separation of this division of the world now. The elites exist in a fantastical world where they can escape from reality and afford what they want, and the rest of the people exist in a plane where people are poverty stricken. They're hungry.
Yeah, and there's the like frequent science fiction trope of like you have the common people on the ground, and the fancier, more important people are up above. And in this case, they're up above in airships, living up in
very
airships.
Miyazaki again. Yeah. And that distinction is, the absolute class system, the absolute version of the class system. So she's just desperate to find a son. That's all she wants to do. She believes that he's now in reality, and hasn't taken the pill. And she manages to find in this giant building, and she looks like she's homeless. She looks like she's destitute. She's dressed in rags, and she ends up finding Paul Giamatti, the doctor from 20 years ago. And prior to that, who helped Darren, and asks him what's happened. And unfortunately, not so long ago,
6 months ago,
6 months, Aaron took the pill to enter the fantasy world, and he knows that she's never going to see him again, because as he explains, and as we've been discussing, once you enter that world and create your own version of that reality, that's it. You're gone.
Yeah,
you can never be found again.
No, because you could be anyone, you could be anything, you could be anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. And so, after like a loving embrace and with her friend the doctor and little discussions, she decides that the only thing left is to re-enter this animated sphere, and to live out the rest of her years, at least fantasizing about the people that she loved. And some of the last shots we get are animated versions of young Aaron.
From Aaron's point of view.
From Aaron's point of view.
Even going back to being born.
Yeah. The childhood, basically. The happy times they spent together.
And seeing the sister, like the older sister, head off into her life. And then seeing his mother get cryogenically frozen.
Yeah. It's such a beautiful but very, very somber ending. There's no neat tight bow in this film, as you'd expect from this type of film, and certainly the director. It's such a complex film, but it really isn't at the same time. I mean, as we mentioned, it discusses everything from the class system to the notion of what reality is, to celebrity culture and the use of them as a commodity. And then steps way beyond that.
I think really sort of what the movie mainly addresses is escapism at the fundamental level. And what I really appreciate is that it doesn't really sort of make a moral judgment one way or another on the subject of escapism. Like it kind of does in the scene where Robin admonishes people and urges them to wake up, people. But then at the end, she indulges and goes into and escapes into the hallucinatory reality herself, because she cannot, like, the alternative of the real world is simply too stark to bear without Aaron. And I think it's really engaging, the way the movie does that, because fundamentally a lot of our entertainment is escapism. And it is this sort of balance that we have to strike between, of course, acknowledging reality and escaping away from reality as well. And
dipping too far into one or the other, and the consequences of that.
Yeah, and I think that the way the movie does it is just deeply engaging and deeply interesting, and it's the kind of movie that stays with you long after you've seen it, and makes you think and makes you ask questions and try to figure out the answers. It's a deep
any film that makes you cognate on this level, I find just fantastic, because it breaks down so many thought processes and ideologies all at the same time. And as I said when we were watching it, it made me think very much of Eternal Sunshine of a Spotless Mind.
Yeah.
The feeling that I got from the film,
And
that's a very different
Inception
film, but
to an extent.
and Inception. I mean, I just did Inception with a few of my students, and breaking down the different realities within realities was really quite fun. This is different from that. It does have those levels, but it does it in such a beautiful way. It's
just such an amazing work of cinema in displaying what you can do with the medium, and what you can do with the medium of animation once you start really experimenting with what you can do, rather than just having talking animals like in a story that could just as well have been like portrayed with human actors. Portraying a story like Waltz with Bashir that can only be done with animation as the medium. I have enormous respect for that, for the way Folman is able to do that. And work in that medium.
And the creation of this dreamlike animation state it's one of the most wonderful portrayals of a world in cartoons that I have ever been witness to. And I think both you and I, upon finishing this film, we literally just sat there kind of gobsmacked for a minute or two.
Yeah, and saw the end credits.
And watched the end credits all the way through. Watched an interview afterwards with Robin Wright and Ari about how the film came about, and that's really interesting in itself. This quite popular novel combined with real life.
It's based on a novel by the Polish science fiction writer Stanisław Lem, who also wrote Solaris. It's based on the novel The Futurological Congress. It's not an adaptation because Folman has changed so many elements, but he sort of maintained the heart of the idea and concepts that are explored in the book are explored here, and there are sort of mirrored scenes as well, but fundamentally what he sort of adapts are the concepts, thoughts, and ideas explored in the book.
Yeah, and then that integration with the Robin Wright kind of story and recalibration of her history.
The hook of Robin Wright, like playing herself, I think just lends a tremendous immediate credence to the film that wouldn't be there if she was just like Sandy Johnson, the actress, right?
Yeah.
Because she's recognizable in our world, and we have a relationship with Robin Wright of our world. We already come into the movie with some kind of relationship to the Robin Wright character. So I think it's a really effective decision to have Robin Wright play herself with the baggage that the real world Robin Wright has and sort of carries into the film.
You know, there's two words that I would use to describe this film, and I don't use them very often. The first is remarkable. I think the initial themes and in the sci-fi thriller elements that then have this distinct change when we enter the animated world is remarkable. I think what he does within this film as a director, coupling those two things, the multiple complex themes, the notion of reality, animated reality, hyper reality, and beyond that, the recreation and assertion of an individual's reality from their essence is remarkable. The other word I would use to describe it is it's quite a profound film. I found it really profound.
Yeah, same.
And that is not a word I use very often when it comes to cinema. Very now and again. It has to be such a unique, beautifully constructed, and wonderfully performed and acted film, which hits heights that you don't often see in most art forms. Occasionally, someone will reach those heights, and I think Ari Folman in this film, it's his modus operandi. You know, I haven't seen his full body of work. I've only seen the Waltz of Bashir.
Though I mean, that's really the only sort of main movie that he's made.
Right.
Up until now is with the Congress as well. Before then, he was basically sort of a small-time filmmaker for like the Israeli reserves, and
Well, I'm absolutely blown away by it. And I said, to you, it's probably now, after one single watch, at least in my top 25 films of all time. And I suspect after more watches, it's going to be higher than that.
Yeah.
I'd never just watch a film once and go, oh, it's the best film I've ever seen. It takes a while to pull something like this apart and to really dig into the stuff that we've missed, because there's bound to be an absolute ton of it.
Yeah, but I mean, just in terms of what it does and what it shows, what you can do with the medium of film, I just think it's certainly elite tier.
Absolutely.
It is a masterpiece in a lot of ways.
It takes the conventions of cinema and plays with them.
Yeah.
And that's what the best directors do. Now, and the interesting thing about this is it's not just playing on genre conventions, which is the usual way that you would play with, like Cabin in the Woods. Cabin in the Woods is all about taking the conventions and tropes of horror and subverting them and then completely altering them. This goes way beyond that. It's playing with the convention of cinema itself, and that is artistry. That's pure artistry.
And I mean, it's just, again, I have this tremendous respect for the way Folman approaches animation, because he approaches it from sort of the perspective of absolute freedom. That animation as a medium is what gives me absolute freedom as a filmmaker. It doesn't set limits for what I can do, and so it allows me to delve completely into the realm of imagination. And that's what he does with Waltz with Bashir, with a lot of the dream sequences in that movie, where there's this sort of recurring blend of reality and dreams and recollection of memory. And here it's just this sort of hallucinatory, between hallucinations and reality and fantasy. I have enormous respect for him as a filmmaker. He's currently working on a project to adapt Anne Frank's diary. He was asked to by basically the Anne Frank estate to make a movie, and he insisted that the movie had to be animated, and so he's trying to adapt Anne Frank's diary at the moment in a film called Where is Anne Frank? And it's basically told from the point of view of Anne Frank's imaginary friend. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how that movie is going to turn out. Like I've seen some of the animated stills or the stills from the movie, and it looks as gorgeous as anything Folman has made so far.
Well, it's absolutely on our list, and as soon as it's released, we will watch it immediately.
Yeah,
because I'm so impressed. I mean, for me to suddenly adore a film after a single viewing takes a lot. Adore.
Yeah, I mean, we've both seen a lot of films, and
yeah,
and a certain fatigue often sort of wears in because you see the same thing, the same tropes, the same stuff getting recycled over and over. So it often becomes quite fairly predictable. And this movie was not predictable at any point.
No, not at all. There was no point where I was going, we can see the established conventions. I know exactly what's going to happen here.
No, you're just along for the ride.
Yeah, perhaps the live action, you can see many of the story beats coming-ish, but the performances, the distinction of the characters, is so unusual and unique and well performed that by the time we get to the animation, we're already really, really into these concepts. But then the concepts become high concept, and yeah, I absolutely adore it. I can't ask people enough to just take a jump in and dive into something which is maybe something you'll never have experienced before.
But
I mean, I certainly haven't. I've seen an immense amount of films because of my background, an immense amount, and there are some films I've seen which have moments that touch upon this in terms of its themes. It's the postmodernity, the reality, hyperreality, all these elements. There are some films that we talked about on this podcast. Strange Days discusses some of those aspects, but not in this way, not with animation in this way, not with the care and beauty that's taken by everyone involved.
There's a scene, like in the initial meeting, the initial time, I think it is, when Robin meets John Hamm's character, where they're sitting and talking, and she's just watching him, and like flowers start growing out of his skin.
Yeah. Like an acid trip
and branches and stuff, and it's just so beautifully animated. and then you have these like 4 cockroaches between them playing poker.
Playing poker on a table.
Yeah, on the table.
Like evocative of the dogs in the painting set
Yeah.
around.
And it's just, it's endlessly inventive. It's imaginative. But I mean, it is a couple of words of caution. It is a movie that's going to challenge you. It's going to require a lot out of you. It's not a movie you should go watch while hungover or the like. You need to be in a fairly clear-headed state of mind, and you need to be sort of willing to go along with the ride throughout its runtime of a little over 2 hours. Like it
you
never
need to be willing to use your intellect. That's what you need to do. You need to be willing to use your intellect. You need to be willing to focus, because this is not a breezy film that you can just kind of pay attention to and everything will make sense.
Yeah.
If you don't pay attention to this, you will lose all concept of what's happening on screen.
No toilet breaks.
No toilet breaks. Turn your phone off and just enjoy it. Just enjoy envelop yourself in it. Let the film totally wash over you. And if you do that and you become invested in the animation section in particular, it throws so many complex ideas around that it will make you think. It will stick with you. Moments in it will emblazon themselves on your mind, and that is the very best of cinema. That's why Blade Runner is my favorite film, for many of these reasons. Because moments in these films elevate themselves beyond the medium.
Yeah.
And that's rare. And when it happens, people should take note and they should watch it. Now, let's just very quickly, before we wrap up, just discuss, this is not going to be a film for everybody, as I've seen in the reviews. There are people who are going to find the the context and the ideas being discussed as very difficult to cognate.
And some are going to find it pretentious.
And some are going to find it very pretentious. They are, absolutely will. And some will find that, we discussed the fact it's a film of 2 halves, very, very much like Full Metal Jacket is, but in a far greater dimension than that film is even. So if you find that jarring as well, maybe, just realise that, right, and this is what I often teach students. When a director is removing some of the language of film, like a transition which fades to black to tell you the passing of time has happened or something like that, they're actually telling you to think. The language of film in Hollywood is designed to make you not particularly think. Often. Not always, certainly. There's plenty of films that do.
Yeah.
But often the language of film is there to literally foreground the narrative and make all other techniques in a film rendered invisible. So that you are literally engaged with the narrative and you're not seeing anything else. You don't have room to cognate. This film, even by removing a simple transition to move you from live action to animation, is making you think. Hard cut, you're immediately there. And that's what this film does. It elicits thought. Proper, complex thought. And that's probably the highest praise I can give any film.
Yeah. I mean, again, highly recommended that you go search it, that you go find it and watch it. I mean, it's available on YouTube. Was for me like on rent and purchase.
Yeah, that's where we watched it.
So hopefully you'll be able to find it there as well.
It's also on Xbox, as well, because immediately afterwards I had to buy it.
For the UK anyway, yeah.
For the UK, it's on the Xbox, so you can buy it in the films and TV section there. It's bound to be about on Amazon as well. But just go into this, open your mind, and just let this dreamlike, chaotic, crazy, complex film just move over you and envelop you. It's the best way to watch it. Silver and I have watched a lot of films together now, and this is one of the most fantastic we've been privy to seeing.
Yeah, and I mean, thankfully we were able to watch it together, which was also a very nice experience. And yeah, like I mentioned, we both sat there in stunned silence when it was done and watched it through to the end credits.
And we talk a lot, so that doesn't happen often. Really,
I mean,
doesn't.
we were also. That's also a sign, because we weren't really talking all that much throughout the film.
No, and we often do. I mean, even good films, whether we've seen them or not, we tend to be able to talk quite easily through them and still, know exactly what's happening. But this is a film that now and again, now and again we'd say things, but it grabbed your attention so much and maintained it that, oh wow. Yeah, so just go and watch it. Just listen to this podcast. Go and watch the damn film and talk to us in the comments. Because I would assume this is a film that went not under the radar, but it's certainly not exactly out there for most people who enjoy
No, I mean
cinema.
it premiered at Cannes in 2013, where it did get like garner some buzz, but beyond that, it hasn't really been. It certainly hasn't been out in the public perception now.
Okay, go and watch it. I've got nothing else to say. Go and watch this remarkable, unique, beautiful film, and talk to us in the comments. We love film discussion, and this is a film that elicits so much discussion.
Yeah.
We mentioned a few podcasts ago when we did The Exorcist how difficult it is to talk about a film like that, which is so iconic and so deep in popular culture. This film is so far removed from that and has so much to talk about that we want you guys to engage.
This is very much the sort of film that we basically started this
make
podcast
this channel for.
Yeah,
exactly right.
So with that out of the way, what are we gonna be watching next week?
Well, do you know this wasn't difficult at all? As soon as we'd finished the film, after my brain had gone, decompress, let's think, I immediately, from my uni days, and I haven't seen it for a long time, went to a film that I absolutely adore, because it's a film about the love of cinema. That film is Giuseppe Tornatore's 1988 Cinema Paradiso.
Yeah.
I absolutely love it, but I haven't seen it for an age. It must be 20 years. But when I did watch it, and when we studied it, I watched it a lot. A lot. And Tornatore has made some wonderful films, but that's the one that always sticks with me. Yeah. His magnum opus, absolutely right. So that's what we'll be watching next week, which I just thought would be a wonderful follow-on for what we've watched in this amazing film, The Congress.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope you'll join us then, and until then, thank you for joining us for this. Go watch The Congress, and take care.
Have an exceptional time, guys. We'll see you next week.